The day after Skilling resigned, Sharon Watkins sent a letter to Ken Lay.
We will begin with Ms. Watkins.
I am Sharon Watkins.
Would you identify your counsel for the committee?
Yes, my counsel is Mr. Philip Hilder.
When you hear the story for the first time, it's unbelievable. What Sharon was telling me was more than accounting irregularities as such. I mean, it was a massive fraud of enormous proportions.
In mid to late June of 2001, upon the resignation of Cliff Baxter, I went to work directly for Mr. Fastow.
It has evolved to the corporate crime of the century.
I was highly alarmed by the information I was receiving.
What Sharon Watkins discovered began the unraveling of Fastow's complex partnerships.
Andy put me in charge of this asset listing, and there were about a dozen assets that had been hedged with one of Andy's entities, the Raptors. And so I was working with a spreadsheet, and the math just didn't add up. It didn't make sense to me. I mean, accounting doesn't get that creative. I couldn't believe that Arthur Anderson had signed off on it. I couldn't believe that so many people were going along.
Behind Fastow's partnerships were enormous guarantees of Enron stock. Fastow had gambled Enron's future on the hope that its stock would never fall.
My first reaction was that I should warn Ken Lay. The day after Skilling left, I sent this one-page anonymous letter. But within a week, I was meeting with Ken Lay. I'd identified myself in the hopes of really making my point that Enron needed to address this situation. I mean, companies rarely get away with cooking the books, but when they do survive, it's when they come clean, not when they're exposed from the outside.
Ms. Watkins, I went...
Ms. Watkins did not talk to me, Senator.
Well, Ms. Watkins said Clifford Baxter told her that he met with you repeatedly to express his concern.
Cliff and Andy they didn't like each other. They had a very strained personal relationship, and Cliff's issue had nothing to do with the appropriateness or inappropriateness of the transaction.
I'd mentioned Cliff Baxter in these memos. And I remember I made the comment to him, well, you're one of the good guys. You were one of the people fighting against this, and it'll be all right. And he said, oh, I don't think it's going to be all right for any of us involved in this.
When I started working on the book with Sharon, I was interested in writing about a whistleblower. People don't really appreciate what she did and the bravery that it took in that company.
Andy Fastow would not have put his hands in the Enron candy jar without an explicit or implicit approval to do so by Mr. Skilling.
I can't for the life of me see what basis she would have for suggesting that I would know some of that. I mean, how would she know that? And I don't see that it's at all inconsistent that there would be some things I don't know if some people purposely kept me from knowing some things.
I felt like I was one lone voice within Enron saying, look, we've committed horrible fraud. And of course, all hell broke loose. Within 6 short weeks, Enron was spinning out of control.
Probably in more normal circumstances, I would have had a few more words to say about September the 11th. Just like America's under attack by terrorism, I think we're under attack. And of course, now we've got the SEC inquiry, informal inquiry.
The SEC launched an investigation when the Wall Street Journal published articles revealing Fastow's murky deals. Enron announced massive financial restatements. Investors began to worry that billions in mark-to-market profits were really losses.
As you can, of course, see, the underlying fundamentals of our businesses are very strong. Indeed, the strongest they've ever been. But regrettably, that's not what Wall Street is focusing on, and I doubt that's what you're focusing on. This inquiry will take a lot of time on the part of our accountants and lawyers and others, but it will finally put these issues to rest.
At the very moment Ken Lay was talking to employees, only a few blocks away, Enron's accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, had begun destroying its Enron files. On October 23rd, Andersen shredded more than 1 ton of paper.
Despite the rumors, despite the speculation, the company is doing well, both financially and operationally.
He was making all kinds of statements, reassuring employees, and not just employees, reassuring investors. We have no accounting irregularities. The company's in the best shape it's ever been in.
Now, from the standpoint of Enron stock, we're going to bring it back. We're going to bring it back. All right, we're down to questions. And I've got a few up here. I would like to know if you are on crack. If so, that would explain a lot. If not, you may want to start because it's going to be a long time before we trust you again.
It certainly wasn't clear to anyone at Enron, much less anyone outside of Enron. It wasn't really clear what was going on or what was going to happen.
I know there's a lot of speculation about Andy's involvement. I and the board are also sure that Andy has operated in the most ethical and appropriate manner possible.
The next day, Andy Fastow was fired when the Enron board discovered that he had made more than $45 million from his LJN partnerships.
Question, Mr. Fastow, is how could you believe that your actions were in any way consistent with your fiduciary duties to Enron and its shareholders or with common sense notions of corporate ethics and propriety? How do you answer, sir?
Mr. Chairman, on the advice of my counsel, I respectfully decline to answer the questions based on the protection afforded me under the United States Constitution.
Andy, in many ways, I think he was set up as the fall guy. All of the Enron executives were saying, there's your man, Andy Fastow, he's the crook. You know, he's the one that stole from Enron, stole from LJM. He's the one that cooked the books. Go after him.
I've thought about this, and it couldn't have just been a few executives at Enron that made this happen. If you think of the banks involved, Chase, Morgan, Citibank, the billions in loans, Arthur Anderson. What about Vincent and Elkins, the lawyers that represented us? There had to have been complicity across the board because it was all too easy. All too easy.
The Enron collapse was an enormous tragedy. This is a company that had over 30,000 employees. And clearly in a company that size, you have a lot of senior officers that have a lot of authority in which you place enormous trust. Clearly in this case, there was at least one, Andy Fastow, that betrayed that trust. To the extent that I did not know what he was doing, that he obviously didn't share with me what he was doing, then indeed I cannot take responsibility for what he did.
I never heard him say I take responsibility for a thing. Sounded to me like the wonderful movie Chicago. I was reminded of the puppet strings and the dancers and the tap dancing and pointing at the gun. I mean, everybody's in step but Johnny.
I continue to grieve, as does my family, over the loss of the company. Linda and I saw our net worth reduced from several $100 million down to something less than $20 million on a net worth basis. And of course, as you said, about $1 million or less in liquidity.
I don't know whether I'd be rather be shot as a crook or as an idiot.
I believe the only venue for me is the ride of broken dreams.
Oh, you mean the Enron ride? Let's go. Enron hit the national psyche. It hit it as sort of the time-tested lesson, and that is if it looks too good to be true, sometimes it is.
We're all gonna be rich! We broke even!